you asked for it. I never got around to making it, but today I'm demonstrating the value of peer pressure by showing you guys around this place. The plan is to talk through the what, the how, and the dear God why behind my arguably unnecessary sim racing studio, while I try to convince myself and hopefully some of you guys that I've made some good decisions. Last week I asked Twitter what it wanted to see in this video, and the vast majority of responses were filming, capture, workflow, and other nerdy camera related things. But don't worry, I'm going to tackle sim racing stuff as well. So hopefully, as well as being moderately entertaining, this will also prove useful to anyone with an interest in content creation and those that just like having a peek behind the curtain. The unattainable goal of friction-free creation starts with the overall layout of the studio. I split the downstairs area into three main sections: the sim racing area, which is under the mezzanine, the production and editing area in the middle, and a general shooting space near the front of the studio. Upstairs has taken a bit of a backseat thanks to COVID, but once we're all up and running again, I'll be building a setup there where I can film more piece to cameras and interview guests, and also, by my calculation, I can squeeze in another sim rig should the need arise. Now, let's talk about the sim racing stuff before the algorithm starts to punish me. At the moment, I've got two sim rigs set up in the studio. The main rig, which I feature in a lot of videos, will be pretty familiar to most of you, but there's also what I'm calling the B rig, which I'll be using to back-to-back test equipment, race against visitors, and maybe get a bit more experimental with the setup. As I've said before, the focus of the main rig really has to be content creation, since that's why I'm here, and the equipment choices are driven by that need alone rather than racing. The B rig, on the other hand, at least once the seat arrives, won't be constrained by any of that, so VR and triple screens are very high on the priority list. Between the rigs, I have what I'm affectionately referring to as the wall of shame. It makes for a great backdrop for filming, keeps all of the wheels in close proximity, and serves as a reminder for why I'm here should I get too distracted by some of the other work I have to take on to pay the bills. I'm not going to do a rundown of all the equipment since it's been featured pretty heavily in a few videos recently, but I will mention a couple of things that I always get questions about. I'm running the SimuCube Pro and Huisingveld Sprints on the main rig at the moment. This is in part because I felt like a change, but also because I wanted to make a back-to-back test video with the Fanatec Podium and OBP pedals when the seat for the B rig arrives. But right now, I don't really have a big preference for either setup. Next up, screens. Yes, I'm running single screens. Triples can be a real pain for external screen capture, so at least on the main rig, it'll need to stay that way. The B rig, however, time will tell. I'm not going to drone on about sim equipment for too long since I've made a couple of hundred videos about that sort of thing already, so let's move on to more studio-y matters and talk about how I use this space to actually make videos. I know it's not very exciting, but every video starts with pre-production. I sketch out a rough outline of what it is I want to cover and then build a scene-by-scene plan for the video. As these videos have become more and more complex, this has been an invaluable part of the process. It ensures that I actually shoot everything that I need and that there's a coherent narrative running throughout the video, mostly. Speaking of which, the next step is to write a script for any of the scripted elements of the video and then adjust the project plan as needed. And with all of that out of the way, I can actually get out the cameras. There are two main rigs that I use for shooting, both using Lumix GH5s. At the time I bought these, Sony and Canon really didn't have any great options for cameras that could shoot 4K and 60 frames per second, so I went with these Micro Four Thirds cameras, which I don't mind saying was pretty scary after a decade of shooting full frame, but honestly, they have been really fantastic. My main camera, which I use to shoot piece to cameras, is in a tilter cage with a 5-inch screen and a little tilter remote follow focus, which can be used to remotely operate either the focus or the zoom, which is extremely handy when you're surrounded by sim rigs, lights, and despair. I almost exclusively use an Olympus 12 to 40mm f2.8 lens on this camera. The B camera spends most of its life on this Edelchrome programmable slider. This is another useful tool if you're filming on your own to help create movement in shots, but I mostly use it for B-roll, as many of you will have already seen in my videos. In terms of lenses, I tend to swap between this Leica 12-40mm f4 and a Sigma 30mm f1.4 if I want to make life difficult for myself trying to focus with a depth of field that's roughly equivalent to the thickness of my own fragile ego. Sound is recorded with a selection of different microphones, which I'll choose depending on the situation. I've been using a Shure SM7B for voiceover work since long before I started YouTube, and it is ideal for use in rooms with terrible acoustics, which, well, this isn't, but it's still not where I'd like it to be. If the SM7 isn't appropriate, I'll either place a Rode NTG2 shotgun mic or use a lavalier, though I try to avoid using the latter if I'm going to be mixing it in with the voiceover footage, as the SM7 and lavs sound very, very different, and that just increases the post-production workload. Unfortunately for today's video, I've had to use all three. All of the sound is recorded on a Zoom H6 field recorder, and it's also fed through to the camera for internal recording and audio sync. But if I'm just doing a voiceover or dialogue replacement, then I feed it through my mixing desk, which really is over the top for what I'm using it for here, but I already owned it, so it's cheaper than going out and buying something else. Now, gear is really only a small part of the story when it comes to filming. And if anything, the space is just as important. At the front of the studio, I have a full-width paper backdrop, which I don't use all that often, but when I do, it blocks the doors, which I actually view as a nice bonus. To the right of that is my still life table and top-down shooting rig. I cobbled this lot together from some spare aluminium profile, an IKEA desktop and some trestle legs, and it actually allows quite a lot of flexibility when shooting things like product demonstrations. I can clamp paper backdrops on, attach lights, and even have a tripod ball head from an old GorillaPod so I can mount a camera up there. This is very much function over form, but boy does it function. Speaking of which, behind that is my battery charging area, which I've actually shown on the channel before, and it owes its entire existence to Casey Neistat, whose ideas I should probably steal more often. As this is a gaming channel, a lot of attention has been paid to getting footage out of the gaming PCs and the console that I still haven't got around to setting up. So in the middle of the studio, I have what you might call an editing den if I were feeling grandiose, but more accurately, it's a desk with a computer. It's placed in the center of the studio so I can easily run cabling out to the various rigs and cameras for video and audio capture. I have 5 or 6 different ways of getting video into the editing PC, and none of them are without their drawbacks. I had been using a pair of Elgato 4K60 S Plus external capture cards, but they've not been all that reliable, which is extremely frustrating. On the other hand, the 4K60 PCI card version is so much better, and I use that for the vast majority of game capture from the sim rigs. As a backup, I have an old Blackmagic 1080p PCI card, which is, as you would expect, rock solid. On the other hand, if I'm running cameras into the PC for things like live streams or the odd occasion where I do multi-camera recordings, then I am actually a really big fan of the Elgato Camlink 4K, which seems to get on and just do the job without any fuss. As for capture software, I'm still just using OBS Studio, which is a fantastic piece of freeware that does everything I need it to do and more. But for the rare occasion that I need to do something with remote calling guests, I use vMix, which is both expensive and frustrating. Speaking of which, I do all of my editing in Adobe Premiere. Last but by no means least on the filming side of things are lights, which honestly I need to upgrade. I'm running 3 Godox SL60s and a couple of Aperture HR267 LED panels if you're a bit of a light spotter, which I must admit I'm not really. And they just about get the job done, though it's tough to venture much above f5.6, which is in part because if you want to shoot at 60 frames per second, you need a shutter speed of 125, and that means a lot of light. Finally, augmenting the proper video lights are a bunch of LED strips and RGB floodlights that I use to make this place look a little bit less like a kill room. Whatever the case, if you have any questions, then please feel free to leave a comment and I'll try and get back to everyone. And I guess all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.